perpetually just miss someone? That you have heard about them, seen them from afar, and just when you're about to make their acquaintance, they just seem to escape your grasp? Well, this is how I feel about Dr. Cooper. I'm not ashamed to admit that she has been a scholarly friend in my head for a little while. When I was a freshman at Howard, she was a senior and just about to depart those eminent gates and take the world by storm. So I had just missed her as she set the campus on fire, graduating summa cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa.
All right now.
I know in my heart, though, that she paved an audacious way for folks like me and our community on those hollow grounds. As if she could not get any fiercer, after graduating from Howard, Dr. Cooper would go on to attain her Ph.D. from Emory University. And yet again, I would just miss her. She began her career at the University of Alabama a couple of years before I would arrive as an assistant professor. While I had just missed her bold presence, I know that she undoubtedly cleared a path for me to exist and thrive within this academic space. Currently, Dr. Cooper is Associate Professor of Women and Gender Studies and Africana Studies at Rutgers University. She is co-founder of the popular Feminist Collective and a contributing writer for Cosmopolitan.com and a former contributor to Salon.com. Her cultural commentaries were featured on MSNBC, All In with Chris Hayes, Melissa Harris Perry, Al Jazeera's Third Rail, the New York Times, the Washington Post, NPR, PBS, Ebony.com, Essence.com, TheRoot.com, and TED.com.
Yeah.
We have also been so fortunate to be bestowed with her groundbreaking books, Beyond Respectability, The Intellectual Code of Race Women, and Eloquent Rage, a Black feminist perspective. Dr. Cooper is unapologetic in the centering of Blackness, specifically the ways in which she audaciously calls upon and complicates the lived experiences of Black women. She has challenged us to consider the feminist nuances of Janet Jackson's 2004 Super Bowl controversy, how Black women are represented in popular culture broadly, and the critical importance regarding Michelle Obama in the vein of Black female leadership.
Yes.
Dr. Cooper has pushed us to rethink and unlearn the ways in which we have and still do disregard the humanity of Black women. She challenges us in love and care, and we are thankful. Dr. Cooper, thank you. It is my distinct honor to welcome you into our house and into this forum. Thank you.
What's up? So I'm struggling a little bit this morning with a cold, a flight from hell yesterday. So bear with me. Let me say thank you to my HU,
All right.
Howard is one of those places, it's a complicated place. But I'll fight you, defriend you, and put you out of my house. I'm talking about Howard. So that's just a bit to know about me. Thank you to Dr. Lori Patton Davis. Sis, it's great to try to step into your shoes a little bit this morning. Thank you for your leadership, your fierceness, being unapologetic, telling the truth. You make it easier for women in the academy who are trying to do this work. So I so appreciate it. So I want to talk about Don't Wake Me, I'm Dreaming. Some of you old people in here know the Christopher Williams reference, subtitled A Homegirl Intervention for the Academy. In 2016, I had the pleasure of giving a TED Talk at the TED Women Conference about new work I'm doing on race and the politics of time. And in that talk, I floated the idea that many of the schisms that shape issues of race and diversity might be understood as a battle between those perceived to be world makers and those perceived to be space takers. Now, historically, Western philosophers like Hegel and Kant cast African people as people without a history and as people who have made no significant contributions to the civilized world. And because these people are not considered world makers, it's perfectly justifiable to colonize their lands and steal their bodies. Black people and indigenous people were considered space takers who kept European colonizers from doing the apparently necessary work of bringing what they called civilization to the rest of the world. These men, white men, could not dream a world in which Black lives had any impact on the march or thrust of history. But these men created knowledge frameworks and systems of understanding fundamental to how we are taught to live our lives. And then we are left wondering why we are exhausted, trying to fight for recognition, visibility, care, empathy, and justice in a world structurally designed to actively unsee us. Today, far too many women of color labor under these same challenges. We deal with systems of tenure not made for people like us, who by virtue of our experiences would often never imagine that the only place to do knowledge production is in the halls of the ivory tower. Thus, many of us labor under a legibility problem where institutions don't know how to count the mentoring, pep talks, and rescue missions that characterize our work with students of color. They don't give extra credit for the fact that because you are the only one, you have to serve on every job search committee your department has, so that they can feign being diverse. No one understands that the reason you over-prep all your classes and spend too little time writing the books and articles that will get you tenure is for precisely the same reason. We struggle mightily with imposter syndrome and obsess about standing in front of audiences or submitting work to reviewers that has even the tiniest crack in it. We struggle because stakes is high.
Right.
That good old Howard University English degree. We tell our students, you are good enough, even though we sometimes struggle to hold that truth for ourselves. I want to consider the radical possibility today that the futures we imagine for ourselves begin not with wokeness, but with dreaming. And that means we need new temporalities for Black and radical imagining. You know, there's this Black mantra that says, we will not rest till freedom comes. But, you know, I'm a little skeptical of it. Like, we should be skeptical of anything that rides as gospel. Because surely our ancestors didn't mean that you never get to lay your ass down and take a nap. Or that you never get to stop trying so hard. Or that you never stop trying to prove yourself. Or that you never stop fighting. We gotta rest. And part of what I want to talk about in my exhausted, sick, been doing too goddamn much state is that all of this only matters if it's sustainable. That what we haven't signed up for is projects that will kill us. And that far too often, sisters, the academy takes Black women out. It breaks us and it revels in the ability to do that shit. I cuss a lot, hope y'all all right about it. And so, you know, we gotta really think about what it means that we have signed up for an enterprise who takes joy in what it means to try to break people apart and put them back together, because then when you get put back together, you don't even recognize yourself in the mirror, right? And so that means that we gotta reimagine concepts like time and sleep and dreaming. I feel like my first 2 or 3 years in academia, my time at the University of Alabama, was me putting myself back together again after graduate school. Re-establishing my confidence and finding out where I was in all the academic jargon. And I feel like in the almost 2 years since I gained tenure, it has oddly enough been about resisting the pressure and the comfort of the hamster wheel. There's a comfort in having a linear pathway with clear goals and achievements to look forward to. And as someone who has been in school her whole life, you know, K through 12, I was out of college for a year, I worked at a school, and then I went back to school, you know, because it's summers off and shit, you know, like, it's a sort of thing, right? And so, there's a comfort to that. I'm convinced that for those of us who use school as a drug of choice to deal with childhood trauma, and black girls frequently do, I sure did, that this is why folks always manage to miss that our little girls can be making straight A's and killing the academic game but be dying on the inside. And so, given that is the trajectory of my life, the time post-tenure can feel like being untethered from anything stable or clear. I'm talking about these temporalities that we keep on chasing, about productivity, about what does it mean to show up and meet everybody's benchmark, right? And about what does it mean to be conditioned that those benchmarks are the marks of a productive life. Now, one of the additional observations that I made in my TED Talk is that the space-taking versus world-making framework pivots upon the assumption that white people own time. Professor George Lipsitz, author of the very important book, The Possessive Investment in Whiteness, among many others, argues that white people act as if they own time. Y'all know they do. Y'all know y'all do. One way they do so is by dictating the pace of social inclusion. So these logics about space-taking and world-making continue to persist in our daily lives. And they show up very specifically in the way that we think about diversity processes on our campuses and what does it mean to be faculty of color on our campuses. And part of the work of imagining and dreaming means figuring out how to navigate double dutch, twerk, and two-step to a set of twerk. Yes. Everybody says twerk. Through a set of temporalities not designed for black thriving. So in the time since I earned tenure, I've been trying to think about that. When I got tenure, and then I got tenure in 2017, Beyond Respectability came out a month later, and then Eloquent Rage was moving into production. And I know that shit seems impressive, but one of the things that I'm talking about in terms of temporalities is that there's this way that we keep on making like exceptional achievement, we keep seeing that as a resetting of the bar. Yes. So now folks feel like you gotta produce 3 books before tenure. Look, y'all, I'm barely making it. Don't do that shit. Like, you ain't gotta do that. I'm not telling you not to do it if you have the opportunity, but I'm saying that's not the standard. I didn't get tenure based off Eloquent Rage. I got tenure based off Beyond Respectability. Half of the public work I do, I didn't put that in my tenure file. I don't want white people trying to tell me how often I get to talk about white supremacy. Yeah. Right? Right. So, one of my white women colleagues and mentors encouraged me to power through and get the next book done. There's no question I hate more than what's your next book. Like, B-word, read the first 3. First 3. I know. Shit. Okay. Anyway, so she said, power through and get the next book done so that I can immediately go up for full. She told me something about the fact that most women of color in the academy never make it to full professor, particularly if they don't go for full in the first 5 years after getting tenure. But she said this to me as a white woman with great economic resources, a committed life partner, and a couple of amazing pieces of real estate which I've had the pleasure to visit. And I was reminded in that moment of time, that moment that Ida B. Wells had to get crunk with Susan B. Anthony when Susan told her not to have a bunch of children because she'd then be saddled with, quote, a divided duty. White women not getting it is a multi-generational problem. But Ida got Susan together and explained all the ways that she was going to go ahead and live her best life. Sometimes these be the reasons, right? White feminists and black feminists have such a hard time seeing eye to eye. In a world where partnership is just one more privilege that white women have access to in abundance, telling women of color, particularly black and Latina professional women, to prioritize their professional lives is not always the best kind of solidarity. What I'm saying is that we've been on a different type of time, right? I'm 37, and I gave the better parts of my young adult life to gaining all these academic credentials. So if I spend the next 5 obsessing about being a full professor, then I'll have another academic credential, sure, but not necessarily a partner or children if I decide that I want them. So I've been giving myself permission this year, frankly, shit, to focus on Bay. To build out the next season of my life. It's all really scary stuff for which I have no blueprint, stuff for which I'm often mad as fuck about, because I feel like I should have learned it a long time ago, right? But I'm learning again that part of what it means to be in the academy in a world not built for us, is being all right with a different set of temporalities. Right, our queer fam, who talk a lot about temporalities, and our fam who have disabilities, who talk a lot about temporalities, can be really instructive for us to think about the fact that sort of like white neoliberal linear notions about what it means to achieve and be successful are not the only markers of a well-lived life. And shit, is the shit really working out well for white people? That's not clear. I mean, they run everything, but they're miserable. That's why they terrorize everybody. Y'all mad about it, but that's what the 10 years do for you. Just don't say. I wrote eloquent rage, not for my academic colleagues, nor as a pathway to full professorship, but for Black girls like me who needed Black feminism to name structural realities and the intimate particularities of what it means to be a Black girl dreamer in a world built on limiting our imagination. Let me say, however, that I do value being an academic. And I want to say that because I think many of us struggle with survivor's guilt for being here and for having the levels of access that we do. Right. And it's a thing that I talk about in this chapter of Eloquent Rage called Favor and Fair. So a lot of my academic work and my movement has been shaped by being an active member and participant in the movement for Black lives. But because I get to hang out with the younger millennials, 37, we're still technically millennials. I just like to say that to fuck with people because, millennials are knocking on 40. But on the lower end of that category, I've noticed a troubling trend among some of my young colleagues railing against the academy in all its forms of violence, even as many of them stress themselves out trying to get into and make it through the most prestigious academic programs. I call some of what is happening performative wokeness, which is why I said, don't wake me, I'm dreaming. It sounds cool to talk about how terrible the academy is, but like I keep telling folks, I didn't become a radical Black girl on my block back in Louisiana. And I didn't become a feminist until graduate school. Because who was talking about feminism in Ruston, Louisiana in the 1990s? Nobody. Now my grandma and my mama were living that shit out, but we didn't have that language. For all who would be dismissive of the import of these spaces and places, I mean, look, part of the thing is that we are asked to come into these spaces, and if you're working class and you didn't come from this, then we do this whole thing, don't make me try, don't make me get ratchet, you don't know where I'm from, all of which is true. Don't let the Ph.D. fool you. Don't ever let it fool you. Right. And at the same time, some of that shit is performative, right? Right. Because why are we asking people to prove that they've been through trauma and drama and privation in order to justify being in the space? Right? For all who would be dismissive, I think it is disrespectful to all the sacrifices my single mama made so I could be here. And if I say, because we do this thing, and look, and I get it, part of what happens is, you be on Facebook, you be espousing some new shit you've learned. And it's always one brother, it's always a brother. And they come over just because you went to school don't mean you know more, don't mean you more educated. And it's like a trigger.
Right.
Right? And so then we start calling out what blocks, what our mama went through, what kind of sacrifices everybody made, just to prove that we don't think we're better than somebody.
Right.
But what I remember is that my grandmama always said, baby, get your lesson. Because she didn't get to finish school and she wanted to.
Right.
So if the folks who raised us knew that there was something we could get here that we didn't have there, then how dare we then get into this space and gaslight the people who sacrificed for us by telling us that this shit don't matter. Yes, the fuck it does. So every time I stand up and talk, and every time I collect a paycheck, it is in tribute to every $20 bill that my big mama pressed into my hand when I came home. Now, what then does that mean for the university? Part of what it means, part of what I'm saying, is that universities are key sites for the inculcation of world making. That's why white people guard them so fiercely. We all are fighting for students and faculty to have access to the university in ways that promote our thriving, precisely because as we tell our students, the ideas that they learn can change the world for the better. I think feminism is a radical idea that if the women in my life had it when I was coming up, maybe we wouldn't have been so traumatized and terrorized. And maybe if more of our sisters had it, they wouldn't be out here on the internet celebrating a certain unnamed preacher who thinks it's fine for wives to be coats and not lids and shit. Because feminism has a language for that. It's a language about objectification, and girl, you deserve better, and girl, you better go out here and don't let this Negro ruin your life possibilities, right?
Yeah. Right.
World making is an intrinsic part of what we do. It's what Dr. Tracy McMillan Cotton calls the gospel of higher education. Yet much of the public conversation and bellyaching on the right about higher education has been about black students as space takers who keep white students from the slots they rightfully deserve. When black students enter the university, they often enter as students who are trying to overcome cultural perceptions of them as space takers by getting the kind of education that will elevate them to the status of being a world maker. This is what our undergrads are doing. This is what our doctoral students are doing. Shit, this is sometimes what faculty members are doing. We are always trying to prove that we are taking up space in good faith because our work is worthy world-making work. But what happens if we work from the assumption that we are the original world makers? I mean, the world did exist before white people. I mean, it did. Ask indigenous people. I mean, part of the reason it's important to say that is because it gives me hope that if it existed before them, it can exist after them, and that's what we're trying to do. I'm not saying kill all white people. I'm saying if you engaged in the project of whiteness, we are going to eradicate that shit. Yeah. But you can be melanin deficient and still go with us to the new future we're building. That's not good enough for white people. Anyway, so just this week at UT San Antonio, we saw a black female student escorted from class by police because her white lady professor didn't like the way the student chose to take up space in the classroom. She was ejected with the force and sanction of state power from the world-making process happening in that classroom. So part of what we must envision is that our classrooms can become sites of radical world-making projects, but we have to be willing to reimagine the power dynamics in them. Eloquent rage exists in part because one of my black girl students, having sat in my classroom, called me out for emotional dishonesty. She was one of my earliest homegirl interventions. And in Eloquent Rage, I talk about homegirl interventions at critical moments in my life that became important for me shifting a wrong-headed way that I was thinking. And so, there's a way that a black girl can pull your coattails and just be like, you tripping. Right. Get yourself together. And in this instance, it was a black girl student. And so she was in my class, I was a doctoral candidate. My advisor was sick and couldn't teach the semester, so I took over this course and taught it. And then about a year later, she saw me on campus. And because I've been a grad instructor, the kids call me by my first name. And so she said to me, I love listening to you lecture because your lectures were filled with rage. But it was like the most eloquent rage ever. And I said, I'm not angry. I'm passionate. Because that's what we tell black girls to say, right? Because we're so afraid that our anger is going to be used to discredit us. And then she looked at me and she said, Brittney, you know you're angry, right? And so what she insisted was that I have some emotional integrity, and what she called me out on was that I was being emotionally dishonest. But this is why I love black women. This is why I unapologetically stand for, ride for, and center black women in my work. Because she saw me in a way that I couldn't see myself. Right? And so she helped me to see myself more clearly. White world imaginings are always about denying the function of emotions in our pedagogy, our activism, and our scholarship. But if you've ever taught black students, you know they require emotional integrity. Black students can peep out of bullshit. What would happen if we taught, administered, and led from the proposition that we are mad, or at the very least that we're emotionally invested? I actually am emotionally invested in my students learning that white supremacy ruins the world. I'm invested in my black male students learning something about patriarchy so that they won't terrorize the women in their lives later. I have an agenda in the classroom. It's just that this agenda is rooted in scholarly understanding and study. What's up with this idea that we're not agenda setting in the classroom? Of course we are. We're world making in the classroom, and world making is always an agenda setting proposition every time. And we get to determine whether it's going to be radical or colonial, whether it's going to strip power from people and be unjust, or whether it is going to be the stuff that makes it possible for people to live. Our refusal of emotional honesty shows up in the lack of integrity we have when it comes time to enact the theories we say we care about. It's when our theory doesn't match our practice, right? We're in a moment where we care so much about being right, being intersectional and saying the right things, that sometimes we don't move or act or theorize with the good sense Big Mama bequeathed us. Look, everybody want to talk about intersectionality, and now some of y'all want to move beyond it to other things, and I've written about that. You can go read it. In short, don't do that. Don't do that. Intersectionality becomes performative wokeness when all your rhetoric sounds great, but your interpersonal engagement with others, the folks who raised you, the homeless who mean something to you, and the folks with you in the trenches fighting is raggedy. Now look, that's a call out to white people, because y'all have gotten the language of intersectionality real well. Y'all know it, Kimberly Crenshaw, 1989. But the true test of whether or not you are on board with this project is, are you all right being in a room like this? Are you all right when black girls actually leave? Or are you like, we're going to take our marbles and go play elsewhere because black people are just taking over? And look, y'all see the problem with that shit when Trump does it, but liberal white people do it too. Is that when you really want to undo the work of white supremacy, and we tell our students, get comfortable with your discomfort. But immediately when you start to see black folks taking over spaces, brown folks taking over spaces and having conversations, then the very first mark that you go for is a question about rigor.
Yeah.
Rigor becomes a code word for anything black people are not doing, and everything white people are doing, when ain't shit about white supremacy rigorous. It's the biggest lie ever. It's rooted in a lie. It's rooted in a foundational lie that says that the folks who founded the world don't have anything to do with the making and shaping of that world. And so y'all ask us to participate in the lie. Then at some point we like, shit, this is a lie. Then we get mad. Then you're like, if you would just lower your tone. Performing, because we're committed to diversity. We want to have all kinds of diverse points points of view. No, that's not diversity. That's white people wanting to make space for bullshit. That ain't diversity. Now, look, that's my call out to the whites. Okay. If you're one of the good whites, don't be mad. We see you, we appreciate you, we'll have some cookies available. Now, I really do appreciate y'all. I'm exhausted by having to tell you how much I appreciate you. It ain't that you weren't seen. Look, black people have a little information underground railroad. You know, anytime a white person shows up and, you know, they seem like they could be okay, trust that a phone call is made, a conversation. You are vetted. Before anyone determines, you know, there's a determination about, you know, no, she cold. He think he cool, but he really not that. That conversation happens, so don't worry, we have a vetting process. If you want to do better, then shit, do better. Okay. Here's my call out to the black and brown folks. You're engaged in performative wokeness if you've built a whole identity in these places for being the only one. It's a whole lot of black excellence out here. Part of the thing that I'm trying to tell y'all about why I love Howard so much is not just about sort of mindless boosterism. It is because my first day on the Howard campus undid a lifetime of training that told me that I was black exceptionalism. There was so many fucking smart black folks. And then I was faced with the existential question of who am I? And being the smart black girl is not my identity, which was the only identity that white people ever let me have from ages 5 to 17. All of a sudden you roll into a black space and you like, well, oh shit, okay, well, what do I like and who am I and what am I? That's what black colleges do. That's what they do. Among many other things, that's what they do. But also, then, when we go into higher ed, look, it's all kind of black folk out here winning. And for those of you, and so look, this is no knock to PWIs. I've mostly been educated in PWIs. But, you know, part of what happens is that you can be so caught up in being the only one that when you get there and you face that moment of existential crisis, your way of dealing with it is to shit upon the other person rather than ally and deal with it. And so then you become that black administrator who is so invested in white approval that you're not quite right and you end up doing your harm and you become a proxy for white people's colonialist imagination. Resurgence of pro-blackness, which I'm both down for and also want us to be sort of thoughtful about. But like, you know, I'm committed to a multiracial struggle because I know how the Civil War was won.
Yeah.
I wonder if liberal white people know. I wonder if y'all have considered what it took to get your people to do right.
Come on.
I mean, I'm not advocating violence, I'm just saying that there was a war. So there's that. But as one of my tests, look, like this, that is the emotional check has to be, if white people smile and grin and a little too at ease with you, if they not, you know, you want them to be a little uncomfortable around you. You do. Because it is the thing that says, look, I require you to be vigilant if you say that you're about this life. Don't let me catch you slipping because you can be cut off And if you are a black person who is so invested in white approval that you're just out here kikiing and shit for white folks, and you know, and they don't never have to go home and think about nothing you've said, then I would invite you to look in the mirror and make sure that you have not unwittingly joined the other side.
Yeah, come on now.
So,
Help us.
part of what it means to be in a space like this is that you can be reminded that there are a whole squad of folks who got this life and are trying to do this work. You can look around the room and you can see them, and you can be reminded that you are not alone even when you go back to places where you feel really isolated. That's why we started the Crump Feminist Collective, because we were two professors living in different parts of Alabama going, what the hell? How are we going to be okay? And so we resisted the impulse to say what we're going to do is just become academic superstars. And we said, you know, we're going to rise and shine together. We got each other. We created community. And so that's part of how you make it in these spaces, is that you have to be intentional about creating community. And what I know about people who come into spaces from having nothing is that we know how to make something out of nothing. So make something out of nothing. That's what we do. That's what we do. Now, I wrote this book about the intimate and personal aspects of how we live out our structural realities because I want our politics to have some integrity. When my student called me out on my race, she asked me to move in that space from a space of authenticity and integrity. She asked me not to conceive the terms upon which white folks would understand my rage as being the only narrative in which my rage could matter or be useful to me. So how do we then create spaces that honor a diversity of experience, give our students room to grow and evolve, and yet do that in a way that is not at the expense of ourselves or black students or undocumented students or queer students, etc. Part of what I do is always to look at how black folks in the university are treated as my marker of where we can go. Now, I understand that conversations about diversity, about inclusion, and about a radical academy aren't just about black folks. They're about immigrant folks. They're about first-generation folk of all racial and ethnic backgrounds. And there is a never-ending antagonism toward indigenous people. But part of what conversations about diversity and inclusion do are they become in the academy what I call anodyne restagings of real conversations. So the language of diversity and inclusion, I know I'm gonna step on some toes because we've been bludgeoned over the head with it and told that that's the way to actually have a conversation about racial justice. But actually, the language of diversity and inclusion is itself performative wokeness.
That's right.
It is. It is. It's not a conversation about justice. It's a conversation about how can white people have a diverse experience and how can universities have the cover of saying that they're doing something. Well, what they do, and this is why it's important to say that, not to step on toes. Look, sis, hustle, do your thing, get in. But y'all know many of you do diversity work, or you will come to do diversity work, and people want you to do that work, but they don't want to give you any power to do it. They don't want to give you any budgets to do it. But everybody want to have a D&I person. And the more fundamental thing that they do, which I'm seeing as I travel around the country and talk, is that they're making our students do the work of diversity and inclusion. And then we have a whole generation of students, 21 and 22 years old, who have done all these diversity initiatives on their hyper-white campuses, and by the time I see them, they're burnt the hell out. And that's not just, that's not what we're here to do. And so we do have to call out our institutions for their performative wokeness. Now, what I know is that many of you, under the banner of diversity and inclusion, which is a language that you know doesn't go far enough, you are still doing the work of justice, right? And so I want to shout out the folk in this room, the black women in this room, the brown women in this room who do the work of diversity and inclusion, you know, on their campuses. Because look, y'all know who they are. Either you are those people or you know those people, because they're the office staff who make sure you get paid, make sure your programs get run. And I want to challenge folks with a modicum of power to think about, how do you treat those folks? Do you talk to them? Do you listen to them? Do you use their institutional knowledge to help you win? Do you undermine them? Because many of you undermine them. Right? Yeah. Now, the last thing that I want to say is actually a thing about how there are two things that I think that Black folks need to know about how to win and how to be okay. The first is this. The demand, what Black people know, what brown people know, what indigenous people know, is that world making and space taking are not separate processes. You gotta take up some space in order to do the work of world making. It's white people who sort of are the space takers who call themselves the world makers, right? So it's like, Black people move in, they build culture, people get excited. White people are like, we want to go live next to culture. It doesn't matter that our gentrification practices are annihilating the neighborhood, we're gonna go take up space because we're entitled to it. I'm looking at this room and I'm looking at the diversity that Dr. Davis has brought because of her leadership. I've been made to understand that this conference doesn't always look this way.
No.
And what I'm challenging white people that are here and those to come to recognize is that the problem is emotionally, y'all will see it as space taking. This is world making. This is creating a set of ideas that can be sustainable for all of us, that help us all get closer to a just future. And the problem is that when you see it as space taking, then the sort of annihilation grammars of whiteness come into play. And so what you want to do is sort of mow it down and get rid of it and stop looking at it because you don't know what world making of this sort looks like. So what I want to challenge folks to see is that you're engaged in a world making project. Now, so there's a demand that we have of institutions to take up spaces, but what I want to challenge sisters, while you're fighting institutions to take up space, don't forget to take up space in your own life. That's a decolonial demand too. Don't let them have everything. Because they'll take all of it. And some you didn't ask for. That's the thing that I'm saying to you about linearity. Do your work. Show up. Be tight. But take rest. Take trips. Call your girls. Visit your family. Get some. Getting some can be hard. You gotta have, not regular people, but I mean, it's only so much work I can do in the talk, okay? I'm just saying that part of what you gotta do is give yourself permission to live a full life. And what these folks will tell you is that you can't. Do the work that your soul must have. So don't be beholden to the contours of the academy. Folks always said this thing to me about, are you sure you want to say all this stuff outside of the academy before tenure? And what I said back to them was, don't get radical after tenure. I'm already crunk. I'm already crunk. But what I'm going to do is, and what I know about people of color is that we can do multiple things. We're great multitaskers. So do it all, right? Show up, exceed their expectations, serve in your communities, but make sure that you are not letting them kill you. And it is really hard to do that. And so you have to remember that you got to ask yourself over and over again, who am I doing this for? Who am I doing this for? And are you doing it for them and to impress them, or are you doing it for yourself in the communities that you're trying to build? So that's one. And the second thing is the thing I've already said, but it's really important. I want to tell a story about it, and I'm done. So when I got to my first job at the University of Alabama, and they had only hired one Black person in College of Arts and Sciences in 2009. It was me. So I go to faculty orientation, and as is my custom, when I roll into a room in a predominantly white space, I was like, where are the Black people in this room? I'm going to go sit next to them. And so I see one sister in the room. So I made a beeline for this sister. And I was like, hey. And she was like, hey. And I was like, oh, she one of them kind of that's sad. You know what I mean? so I was like, she was like real mean to me that day. I was like, we gonna be friends. Because the only way this works is right. We like need each other, I know we do. And I was like, you know what, I'm a great friend to have. So basically I just went out with this girl and, like wowed her with my friend capabilities. And so she accepted me and she's back today, and a lovely person. But we've got to build you a crew.
Yeah. Right.
Get you a crew. It's all kind of people here that's just potential crew if you don't have this. Y'all keep thinking that academics come to conferences to go to panels. That's not why we go. That's not why. We go to see the crew. Really far. That's why I'm sitting down. It's kicking it too hard with the crew at the conference. So, I just want to say to you that you have to be intentional, and some of the challenge of that, particularly for folk of color, now that she is my homegirl, we have talked about the terms of that initial encounter. And she said to me, look, black girls have been so terrible to me. They always compete with me. They're so jealous that I just didn't know what your intentions were. And so for those of you who struggle to be friends, I would ask you to consider, do you see people as a means to an end, or do you just want to be in community with us? So, take up space in your own life. Build you a crew. Be unapologetic about that. And then remember that you are not a slave to these institutions. People love to use plantation metaphors. I don't. Again, it's disrespectful to ancestors. But it also helps us not to see the power that we do have. You actually can set some terms. You can't set all the terms. Look, I can't say some of the shit I said to y'all today to my dean at Rutgers. That's why I came down here and said that. But you do have the power to decide how you're going to do your work. And if we work from the presumption that you're already excellent, which is the presumption that I work from, right? That you can go to therapy and actually own and work on the imposter syndrome. I continue to work on it. When you work from the proposition that you're already excellent, it opens up a different set of possibilities in terms of the kind of work that you can do. So that part of what you see is that, oh look, I'm world making, they just ain't caught up yet. Right? So look, stop trying to be performatively woke. Recognize that your dreams already exceed where these people who think they running shit are. Live your life, live your dreams, do your work. The one thing I have found in doing this the way that I wanted to do it, and not necessarily according to a set of predetermined rules, is that now that I have been carving my path, all that has happened is that the folks who have supposed to have been on the path with me, they have shown up and they walked it with me, and because I'm unapologetic and spiritually covered, the folks who didn't walk it with me have gotten the hell out of my way. Walk the path, don't apologize. You got this. Don't wake me up. I'm dreaming.
Thank you so much again, Dr. Cooper, for coming and blessing us all with that talk. For those of you that are interested in getting book signed or wanting to come up and take pictures with Dr. Cooper after I get off the stage, just come up here and enjoy the rest of the